I opened my daughter's diary the night before her funeral, and by sunrise I had called the police on my own sister. What I found in the back third of that notebook is the only reason I am still standing. I want to say I went looking for comfort, that I sat down at the kitchen table with the funeral program in front of me and a glass of wine I couldn't drink, and reached for that black notebook because I needed to hear Iris's voice one more time before they put her in the ground. That's the version I'll tell people, the version that lets them off the hook. The truth is, I sat down because I couldn't stand up anymore. The funeral home had emailed the program at 9, the flowers, confirmed, the hymn, confirmed, the casket closed because she'd been gone 9 days and the autopsy people were not gentle. Everything that needed a yes from me had its yes. And I had nothing left to do except wait for the morning that would put my 16-year-old in the dirt. So I reached across the table for the diary the medical examiner had returned in a paper bag with her phone, her wristwatch, and the small silver ring she wore on her right thumb. The diary was the only thing in that bag I hadn't opened. I had been afraid of it for 9 days. I had no idea what was waiting in the back third of that notebook. I had buried that thought for 9 days. The cover was scuffed black leather, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $9. She'd kept one since she was 11. 3 full notebooks before this one, all of them stacked in a shoebox in her closet. I'd never opened any of them. We had a deal. The diary was hers. She told me what she wanted me to know. I had kept that deal for 5 years. Tonight I broke it. The first entry was dated almost 3 years ago, and the handwriting was the round, careful script of a 13-year-old who still drew little stars over her eyes. She wrote about her science teacher, about a girl in homeroom who'd told her she had cool eyebrows, about the cinnamon rolls I'd made that Sunday morning. I made it through 4 pages before I realized I was smiling. Then I realized I was crying. Then I realized I had been doing both at once for a while. I would later understand that those 4 pages were the last clean thing I would feel for the rest of my life. I flipped past birthdays and report cards and the soft middle of a girl's adolescence, boy crushes, song lyrics, a bad sketch of our cat, and stopped about 3/4 of the way through where the handwriting changed. It got smaller, tighter. The little stars over the eyes were gone. The entry was dated 9 months ago. It was 4 sentences long. Aunt Dee brought the tea again. She said it would help me sleep. I drank half a cup and the dizziness came back the next day. I'm starting to notice when she's been here. Next to the word tea, she'd drawn a little teacup. Next to the teacup, she'd drawn a tiny skull. The kind a kid doodles on a math worksheet, the kind that means nothing. I looked at it for a long time. I told myself she was being dramatic. 16-year-olds romanticize their headaches. Iris had a flair for the gothic, black nail polish. Edgar Allan Poe on her bedside table. A Halloween where she went as a Victorian widow at 12. Of course she drew a skull next to her aunt's chamomile. That's what I told myself for about 40 seconds. Then I remembered the jar. When she died, when the paramedics had come and gone and the medical examiner's people had come and gone and I had finally been alone in her room, I had gone in to make her bed, to do the only thing I could think of. And under the bed, behind a hardback copy of Wuthering Heights she'd been pretending to finish since Christmas, I had found a small glass jar with a screw-top lid, the kind you buy at the craft store for about $2. It had liquid in it, brownish, about a quarter full. I'd assumed it was old apple juice. I'd taken it to the kitchen, washed it out, and put it in the recycling. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the tile. The recycling bin lives in the cabinet under the sink. I dragged it out and emptied it onto the floor. 3 soda cans. A wine bottle from the day after she died, when my mother-in-law had brought a case and I had pretended to drink one. A flattened cereal box. And the small glass jar, lid still off, sitting innocently against the side of the bin like a piece of evidence I had personally laundered. I picked it up. I held it under the kitchen light. There was still a thin amber film at the bottom, dried into the glass. I lifted it to my nose. Chamomile? I sat down on the kitchen floor. I did not cry. I did not move. I sat there for what I would later be told was 18 minutes, with a glass jar in my hand and a black notebook on the kitchen table above me, and I felt every single thing I believed about my sister begin to come apart at the seams. You have to understand who Diane is, I don't know which tense to use anymore. She was my older sister by 6 years. She was a pediatric nurse at the regional hospital, 22 years on the floor, the kind of nurse who remembers the names of her patients' grandmothers. When my marriage ended, she was the second adult who showed up. She brought groceries every Tuesday. She drove Iris to soccer when my client deadlines ran late. She braided Iris's hair the morning of her 7th grade school photo because I had been crying in the bathroom about a deposition and couldn't get my hands to stop shaking. She was, in every sense the word is supposed to mean, the second mother of my child. I would not understand until that night that the reason she had spent 10 years inside our house was not love. I climbed back into the chair. I set the jar on the table next to the funeral program, beside the order of service, beside the 4x6 photograph of Iris at 15 with her hair in a French braid and her mouth open mid-laugh. The photograph the funeral home had blown up to poster size for the visitation tomorrow. The face I would never make laugh again. I turned the page. The next entry was a week after the first. Same small handwriting. Tea visit, same headache, same heart flutter. I checked my pulse during dinner, 112. Sitting still, not afraid. Writing this down anyway. My eye traced that last line 3 times. I am writing this down. She was 16 years old, and she was building a record. I would later count the entries, the ones where she logged a visit from her aunt and a symptom by the next morning. There were 42 of them, spread over the back third of the notebook. 42 times my daughter had documented a pattern I had not seen. 42 times she had written down the truth about how she was being taken from me, while I sat in the next room with my headphones in, billing hours, telling myself I was a good mother because I made it to her soccer games. I want to be honest, I had no idea. I will say that to a courtroom, to a journalist, to my own face in the mirror for the rest of my life. But I also have to say the harder thing. I had no idea because I was not looking, and my sister knew exactly how much I was not looking. She had been counting on it for a decade. I turned the page again. My hand was shaking so badly I had to flatten the diary against the table to keep the paper still. The next page was an experiment. Iris had numbered the entries 1 through 6, like a lab notebook. Each had a date. Each had 2 columns, the visit and what happened next. Visit 1, drank half, headache the following morning, pulse 104 at school. Visit 2, poured tea into a mug, drank water from a separate glass when Aunt D wasn't looking, no symptoms. Visit 3, drank half. Headache, dizziness, heart flutter for 48 hours. Visit 4, poured tea into the jar under the bed, drank tap water, no symptoms. Visit 5, drank half on purpose to confirm, symptoms returned. Visit 6, never touched it, symptoms never came. At the bottom of the page she'd written, in slightly larger handwriting, Aunt D's tea makes me sick, her tap water doesn't, the tea is the variable. My 16-year-old daughter had run a controlled experiment on her own body. She had used herself as the test subject. She had done what a competent adult would have done if a competent adult had been paying attention. She had done it alone. The next page was a printout, folded in half, taped into the spine. She had printed it from the kitchen computer. I recognized the slightly off-color toner from the cartridge I kept meaning to replace. It was a medical reference page about digoxin. The yellow highlighter she'd used was the same one I'd given her in 8th grade for chemistry. She had highlighted 3 things. The first, digoxin toxicity in adolescents may present as fatigue, dizziness, nausea, blurred vision, and arrhythmia. The second, symptoms typically appear within 12 to 24 hours of exposure and resolve within 72 hours of discontinuation. The third, the one she'd circled twice, in healthy individuals, low doses are difficult to detect on routine toxicology unless specifically requested. Underneath the printout she'd written 4 words. That's why she picked it. I felt the bottom of my chest hollow out. She knew. She'd named the drug. She'd named the reason a routine autopsy would miss it. She'd done what the medical examiner had not yet done. She'd told us where to look. I would not understand until later that night that the medical examiner had in fact started looking. That was hours away. At 20 past midnight, all I knew was that my daughter had named the chemical that ended her life weeks before it ended her life, and the only person she'd convinced was a black notebook. I made myself turn the page. The next entry was longer. 3 paragraphs of dense handwriting. Tonight at dinner, Mom mentioned the soccer game last fall, the one where I fainted in the second half. She brought it up because Aunt D brought it up first. Aunt D likes telling that story. She tells it like a funny family memory. Remember when I had to scoop you up off the field, sweetheart? She tells it the way someone tells a story they're proud of. I have started to think she is proud of it. I have started to think it was the first time. I lowered the diary. The soccer game. October 2 years ago. A regional tournament. I'd had a deposition the next morning, and Iris had agreed it was fine. She had Aunt D. Diane had bought her a thermos of homemade lemon ginger for the bus. Iris fainted at minute 63. Diane had been there in less than a minute, kneeling, telling the other team's mom, "I'm her aunt, I'm a nurse, give me space." An hour later, she'd driven my unconscious daughter home and put her to bed. The pediatrician the next morning found nothing. Growth spurt, he said. Low blood sugar. Adolescent girls. 2 years ago. 2 years. She had been doing this to my child for 2 years. When you understand a thing like that, time does not slow. Time stops being a thing. The kitchen at midnight, the funeral program, the photograph of Iris laughing, those things do not move. You move through them like a swimmer in cold water. Everything has weight, nothing has air. I turned to the next page because the only alternative was screaming, and screaming would wake the neighbors, and the neighbors had brought enough casseroles already. The next entry was a transcribed phone call. Iris had numbered the lines like a courtroom record. She'd been in the hallway, she wrote, 7 feet from the kitchen, when Aunt Dia thought she was alone. The call was brief, 6 lines. Aunt D, yeah, soon. Helena doesn't suspect anything. The other voice, male, Iris noted. How soon is soon? Aunt D, she'll be 18 in 18 months and then everything's locked up forever. So before then, other voice, be careful. Aunt D, I am careful. I'm a nurse. Careful is my whole job. Other voice, you're a piece of work, D. Underneath the transcript, Iris had written, I do not know who the man is. I will. The number on her phone said Glenn. She doesn't have a Glenn in her contacts that I've ever heard her mention. I am going to find out who Glenn is. Glenn, I would later learn who Glenn was. That was hours away. At 12:43 in the morning, the only sentence I needed was the one that came before his name. She'll be 18 in 18 months and then everything's locked up forever. It took my brain about 8 seconds. The trust. My mother's trust. The one that named Iris as primary at 18, locked in, untouchable. If Iris died before her 18th birthday, the trust reverted to me alone, and through me, to my secondary beneficiary, which was and had been since the day I signed the papers 10 years ago, my sister. Iris had figured out the financial mechanics of her own death. I stood up. I sat down. I stood up again. The chair tipped backward and hit the tile and I let it. I crossed into the living room. The trust documents were in the antique writing desk by the window. I'd pulled them out 3 days after Iris died. When the lawyer asked if I needed copies, the folder was still there, tabbed in 3 places. The third tab was the secondary beneficiary clause. I knew it was the third tab because Iris's handwriting was on a sticky note pasted to it. A sticky note I had not noticed. The note said, Mom, look at who's after me on this page. Then look at why we never ate Aunt D's food. She had been in this folder. She had been in this folder while I was in client meetings, billing hours, telling myself the divorce had not damaged her. Back in the kitchen, I pulled Iris's laptop off the dining room shelf, the one the medical examiner had also returned, the one I hadn't dared open. The lock screen wanted a password. I typed her birthday, nothing. I typed the cat's name, nothing. I typed moonscar because of the small crescent on her left wrist she had carried since she was 8, the one I had kissed the morning she died. The screen unlocked. There was a folder on the desktop, one folder, named Moon. I opened it. 143 files inside. Photos of pill bottles in Aunt D's tote bag, taken at angles that suggested Iris had pretended to look for a charging cable. Screenshots of bank notifications about the secondary beneficiary check. A spreadsheet of every visit Diane had made in the previous 14 months. A column for what she brought, a column for what she said, a column for how Iris felt the next day. 41 audio files, each named with a date. I clicked the most recent one. 6 days before she died. The recording started with the kitchen sink running, then a kettle, then footsteps, then my sister's voice, warm as anything I had ever heard. Sweetheart, drink it while it's warm. The recording was 11 seconds long. I stared at the laptop screen until it went black. I closed the laptop. I could not listen to the second recording. Not yet. I returned to the diary because the diary was the only thing in the room that wasn't going to lie to me. The next entry was 4 months before she died. The handwriting had changed again, smaller, steadier. The handwriting of a girl who had decided. I went into Mom's office today. The folder in her desk under Estate has Grandma's will and Mom's beneficiary papers from after the divorce. I am the primary on everything. Aunt D is secondary. If I die before 18, the trust reverts and the secondary becomes primary. I am the only person standing between Aunt D and almost $1 million. Mom has no idea. Mom does not look at this folder. Underneath, in smaller handwriting, like a footnote to her own life, Mom, please don't be angry that I went through your desk. I had to know. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth. She had been apologizing, to me, for going through my desk, to find out why she was being slowly taken from me. I want to say I remembered noticing something off the day I signed those papers. I did not. That day, Diane had driven me to the lawyer she'd recommended, a man named Glenn Lassiter, a friend from her hospital days, a trust attorney, reasonable rates, good with grieving women. I had been a grieving woman that week. My mother dead 90 days, my marriage 3 months gone, a 6-year-old in the back seat eating dry cereal out of a sandwich bag. I had said yes to everything. Glenn. The voice on the phone, in the transcript. I was going to throw up. I made it to the kitchen sink. I did not throw up. I rinsed my mouth and stood at the window, looking at the backyard where Iris had a swing set until she was 12 and a hammock after that, and I thought about Diane's smile at our mother's funeral 6 years ago. The day the will had been settled and Diane had not been the executor she'd assumed she would be. Diane had pulled me aside on the church steps, calm, smiling. Not angry exactly. She did not do anger in public. She had said, almost gently, "You'll regret making this about money one day, Helena. You'll see." I had thought she meant it as wisdom. I had thought she was the wise older sister, telling me grief and inheritance should not get tangled up. I had not thought, for 1 second, that she was telling me what she planned to do. I made it back to the table. I turned the page. The next entry was a list. Iris had labeled it, "In case." In case I'm wrong, tell no one. Aunt D can't know I'm watching. In case I'm right and nothing happens, keep going. Wait for proof I cannot ignore. In case I'm right and something happens, Maya has the package. Maya, Iris's best friend since 4th grade. The girl with the freckles and the loud laugh who had cried so hard at the funeral home rehearsal yesterday that her mother had taken her outside. I picked up Iris's phone. The medical examiner had returned it unlocked. Iris had given me the passcode the day she got it, on the promise I'd only use it in an emergency. I had thought emergency meant a car accident. I had not thought it meant this. I scrolled to Maya. The last text from Iris to Maya was from the day before she died. 3 words. "If anything, soon." Maya had answered, "I'm scared." Iris had answered, "Me too. Hold the package." I tapped Maya's number. It rang twice. She answered crying. She had been crying. I would later understand, since Iris had stopped texting her back 9 days ago. She had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since. She had known something was wrong before any adult in her life knew anything, and she had not known who to give the package to. "Mrs. Marsh," she whispered. "Mrs. Marsh, I have something." "Maya, honey, bring it. Now, don't tell your mom, just walk it over, I'll watch the porch." She hung up without saying goodbye. Later I would learn she had run the 4 blocks in her pajamas. I sat at the kitchen table with the diary open and the laptop closed and the funeral program face down because I could not look at it anymore. 8 minutes passed. They were, I would later understand, the first calm 8 minutes I would have for the next 2 years of my life. There was Mark to think about. Iris's father, my ex-husband, lives in Phoenix now with a woman named Tara who sells essential oils. Saw Iris 3 times a year. Birthday cards arrived 2 days late with a check folded inside. He was not a bad man. He was a soft man. The kind of soft that lets you off the hook for everything because nothing was ever his fault. 8 weeks before Iris died, she had called him. The diary entry from that night was 3 sentences long. "Called Dad. Told him I think Aunt D is hurting me. Dad said, 'Your aunt loves you, kid. You're being dramatic.'" She had drawn a line under that sentence. Then she had written, "I am the only person in this family who knows what's happening to me." I sat with that line longer than any other in the notebook. She had told 2 adults. Her mother had not pressed. Her father had not believed her. My sister had been counting on both of those things for a decade, on me being too tired and Mark being too soft. She had built a plan around our exact failures. The doorbell rang. I went to the porch in my socks. Maya was on the steps with a manila envelope held against her chest with both arms. Her face was wet. She did not look like a 16-year-old. She looked like a soldier handing over a wounded man. "She made me promise," Maya whispered. "She said if I gave it to anyone before she was gone, she would stop trusting me. She said I had to wait." "You waited," I said. "You did exactly what she asked. You did the right thing, sweetheart." Maya put the envelope in my hands. It was heavier than a manila envelope should have been. "There's a thing in there," she said. "A baggie. Don't open it. Just give it to the police." I held the envelope. I held Maya's shoulder. I stood on my porch at 10 to 2 in the morning while a 16-year-old girl who had outlasted my own attention span shook against my collarbone. "Walk home," I said. "Lock your bedroom door. Don't tell anyone you were here. Tomorrow at the funeral, if Aunt D hugs you, you let her. Do you understand me? You let her." Maya nodded. She turned. She walked back into the dark. I closed the door. Back at the kitchen table, I opened the envelope. Inside, a small thumb drive. 3 handwritten letters in Iris's hand, sealed in 3 different envelopes, addressed, in order, Mom, Police, anyone who will listen. A small evidence-sized plastic baggie containing a single dried tea bag. I did not open the letters. Not yet. I went back to the diary, because the next entry was the last one she had written, the night before she died, and I needed it before I needed anything else. The handwriting on that last page was not careful, it was rushed. "Mom, if you're reading this and I'm gone, please believe me. The drug is digoxin. Aunt D's pill case is blue brass clasp. She keeps it in her purse. There is a second jar in the kitchen sock drawer, behind the dish towels. I saved every cup for the last 3 weeks. I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I knew if I did, you wouldn't believe me." The kitchen sock drawer. I stood up. The kitchen sock drawer is the second drawer down on the left, the one I never open because I keep dish towels and pot holders in it, and Iris had been the one who folded the laundry. I pulled it all the way out. I lifted the dish towels. The jar was at the bottom, larger than the first one. Glass, screw-top lid, taped along the side with masking tape. The masking tape had 3 weeks of dates written on it in Iris's handwriting, smallest to largest. Each date had a tiny checkmark beside it. She had saved every cup for 3 weeks. She had been collecting evidence under my dish towels while I was asleep upstairs. I set the jar on the table next to the funeral program. The amber liquid inside was the color of bad iced tea. The smell, when I twisted the cap, was chamomile and something faintly bitter underneath it. I picked up my phone. I called the police tip line. The operator was a woman with a Wisconsin accent and the tired patience of someone who took middle-of-the-night calls for a living. I told her my name, my address. My daughter had died 9 days ago. The medical examiner had ruled it sudden cardiac death, and I was holding 3 weeks of evidence that my sister had poisoned her with digoxin. Could she send a detective? The time was 3:14 in the morning, and I had not slept, and I was not hysterical. She paused. Then she said, very gently, "Ma'am, I'm going to put you through to Detective Soto. She's been waiting for your call." I did not understand that sentence for about 4 seconds. Detective Renata Soto came on the line. Her voice was soft and flat at the same time, the way some people's voices are when they have been doing the worst job in the world for too long. She told me she was 12 minutes away. She told me to put the jar on the kitchen table and not touch it again. She told me she was bringing a forensic kit and a second officer, and that she would not turn on her sirens. She told me she had been drafting a call to me for the morning. She arrived at 10 to 6 with the sky just starting to blue. She brought a young officer with a beard who photographed everything I'd laid out: the diary, the laptop, the thumb drive, the 3 sealed letters, the tea bag in the baggie, both jars. Detective Soto sat across from me and made me walk her through the diary in order. She asked one question near the end. "When you signed the beneficiary update, did Diane recommend the lawyer?" "Yes." "Glenn Lassiter?" "Yes." She made a small note in a small notebook. Then she said, "Mrs. Marsh, the amended toxicology came back at 4:30 this morning. The original panel didn't test for digoxin. The pathologist requested the expanded panel last Friday, flagged it as inconsistent cardiac findings for a 16-year-old. We received the result an hour ago. It's positive. We were going to call you at 8. I do not remember saying anything for a while. She let me sit with it. She is, I would later realize, very good at the part of her job that involves not filling silence. When I could speak, I asked one question. "Can I bury her today?" "Yes," she said, "bury her. We'll arrest your sister at the wake." The funeral was a fluorescent hallway my body walked through. Diane sat in the front pew beside me. Diane held my hand. Diane wept, beautifully, restrainedly, the way a pediatric nurse weeps for a niece, with the dignity of a woman who has taught other women how to cry. I let her. I let her hold my hand. I let her smooth my hair when the pastor said Iris's name. I sat with my sister at my daughter's funeral, and I did not flinch, because Iris had spent 2 years not flinching and I owed her this last performance. Mark sat 2 rows back. Tara had not come. Mark mouthed, "I'm sorry," 3 times across the pew. He did not know yet what he had to be sorry for. Detective Soto sat in the back, near the door, in a navy coat that was not a uniform. The young officer with the beard sat beside her. After the service, after the hearse, after the dirt, we came back to the house for the wake. People I had not seen in years brought casseroles and glass dishes. Iris's chemistry teacher cried into a paper cup. The neighbor with the small dog held my elbow for 10 minutes without saying anything. Diane was in the kitchen. Diane was in the kitchen, making tea. She had set out the box of chamomile she had brought to my house 3 days ago, the day after Iris had died. She was filling the kettle. She was getting down the mugs from the cabinet, the ceramic ones with the little flowers, the ones Iris had picked out at a thrift store for my birthday 2 years ago. She was humming. She was humming. I walked into the kitchen. The little officer with the beard was at the front door, having a polite conversation with someone about parking. Detective Soto was standing in the dining room, her back to the kitchen, her hand near her hip. I did not raise my voice. I said, "Iris kept the tea, Diane." Diane's hand stopped moving on the kettle. She did not turn around for about 3 seconds. When she did, her face was the face I had seen at our mother's funeral, calm, smiling, not angry. "What did you say, Helena?" "Iris kept the tea. 3 weeks of it, in a jar in the sock drawer. Detective Soto has it. She also has the recordings. She also has Glenn." The smile stayed on Diane's face for 1 more second. Then it did not. She set the kettle down very carefully on the burner. She wiped her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, folded by my daughter her last load of laundry. She turned toward the back door. She took 1 step. Detective Soto was already in the kitchen. There was no shouting. The little officer was at Diane's elbow before I could blink. The handcuffs did not click. They ratcheted, softly, the way a seatbelt does. Diane did not say anything. The blue leather pill case with a brass clasp was in her purse on the entry table. The young officer collected it in a gloved hand. Diane looked at me once, on her way out of the kitchen. I cannot describe the look. I do not want to. It was the look of a woman who had loved my daughter the way a hunter loves a deer. Then she was gone. The mourners did not understand what had happened. The neighbor with the small dog asked if I was okay. Mark followed Diane out to the cruiser, came back inside, said, "Helena, what?" and I handed him the diary. He sat down on the stairs and did not get up for 2 hours. The wake ended. The casseroles were put in the refrigerator. The young officer stayed until midnight, sitting at the other end of my kitchen table. He did not try to talk. He brought me a glass of water. I do not remember drinking it. When everyone was gone, I picked up the kettle Diane had filled and poured the water down the drain. The box of chamomile went into the trash. The kettle got rinsed 3 times. Never again would I make tea in it. Why I rinsed it, I do not know. At the kitchen table, I picked up the diary. I turned to the last page, the rushed handwriting, the list of where the evidence was, the plain naming of my sister, and underneath it, small, careful, the way she used to sign her birthday cards to me. One more line I had not registered the first time. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I knew if I did, you wouldn't believe me." I closed the diary. I believed her in the morning.